innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. It's an incredibly special and personal show today. We are celebrating our 100th episode. It's crazy. So thank you so much for listening to the show and sharing it with all the people that you know. It's been such a cool and unique ride for us so far. So for this 100th episode milestone, we wanted to take some time to look back, reflect on some of the lessons learned, the moments that have stood out to us, as well as look forward to what's going to happen in the next 100 episodes and where we see it going. So to do this, I am bringing my podcaster partner in crime on. He helps make things work seamlessly in the back end. And he's my brainstorm buddy throughout this whole ride, our editor and producer, Eric Daniel. Welcome back to the show, Eric.
Todd, thank you so much. It's so exciting to be back. Yeah,
it's been a while since you've been on this side of the mic. I was looking back. It's all the way back to episode 25. Lots has happened.
Yeah, it feels like in a good way, almost a different show. It's like a fresh thing to come back on and talk about. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the standout moments for you in the 99 episodes so far?
There've been a lot. So it's been really cool to see this show grow and develop over way more episodes than I really thought podcasts ever had. Wow. Okay. So if I'm thinking through it, I think the marathon of episodes that we recorded at MEP Force 2019 really made this podcast a real thing.
Yeah. Well, that kind of launched the show when you guys stuck me in a corner of the exhibit hall and just had me talking to people for 8 hours a day.
Yep. If you listen closely on some of those, on one of the last one of those episodes, your voice is holding on, but only just.
I was by a wing and a prayer towards the end of that conference. I was so hoarse, so over talking.
And I think that another highlight definitely was the Burning Man episode. So I think that made everybody and all the listeners, and us included, realize that it's like, oh, you can look outside of the industry to get inspiration and ideas for yourself and your company.
Yeah.
So I think I thought doing that combining art and construction was really interesting on that piece. And I think it led to a lot of conversations later that kind of wove into that really nicely.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's certain episodes that kind of stand out in my mind of turning point episodes for our whole tone, our direction, what kind of started resonating with different people. And the Burning Man episode, which I think is, I didn't look this up beforehand, but it's way back episode 12 or something, somewhere around there. And that for me, when I first heard the concept of, hey, you should talk to these people and what they're doing with an art project exhibit in Burning Man, I was like, that is so far outside of what we're going to be talking about in our scope. How does that have any relevance? And when I got on a call with them to discuss what they were doing before we recorded, I was like, oh, wow, this is actually really cool concept and ties in so much and is actually really relevant to what we're doing. And then to hear the response after that episode, I was immediately pretty nervous putting that episode out there because it was so far outside what we had traditionally done. But that was our number one episode for a very long time. And it took a while for an episode to, it took the queen of prefab, I think, to come on and dethrone that episode. But that was really cool turning point on, well, yeah, why don't we look at construction from a more holistic point of view, not just on innovation, not just on technology. Both are awesome. We talk a ton about it, but look at it from the personal side of things and the cultural side of things and the soft skills, and pulling all that in. And what we have found over the 99 episodes so far is those generally tend to be our best performing episodes that people really latch onto and resonate when we talk about the more holistic approach. So that's why we do so many episodes on that, because I find it incredibly fascinating just on myself, and like to pick those people's brains. But it is really cool every time we do one of those episodes to hear the response back from people that we get. Going back to like the turning point moments and episodes, that definitely helped set us on the direction of the soft skills and the people aspect of it, which is huge and pops up even when we're doing a super technology heavy episode. I'm always amazed that in the end, well, the conversation inevitably comes back to people skills. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the crux of it every single time. If you don't have good people skills, good luck, because you're going to make your path a lot harder.
Yeah, exactly. And I think another turning point, kind of tone setter episode was Angie Simon. I think Angie was the proverbial kick in the rear for all companies to say, all right, you're going to have to face this remote work thing head on, and you're just going to have to face all kinds of new disruption that you weren't expecting. Mm-hmm. And you'll figure out a way to do it.
So I'm such a big fan of Angie Simon, and every time she's speaking, I'm listening to what she's saying, because she has so much wisdom. One of the lines that really stood out to me in that episode was she said that routine is the enemy of innovation. And that really kind of sparked another direction for us, in that let's focus in on those things that we have been doing and unpack the way we've always done it mentality, that there may be some good that comes in that way we've always done it, but we can shatter that too. And we can get out of our routine and get out of what we have been doing. And that's where a lot of the magic happens. And I think over the last 18 months, in that episode, Angie was talking about how the trades had to adapt and come up with new processes and make technology work for sometimes the first time in a workflow ever, and figure out how to make it happen. And they did, because they were able to adapt. And relating it back to the podcast, what I find interesting is, we were doing, I think we had 20 or so episodes under our belt before COVID hit and we all went remote. And all those episodes were done in person, face to face. And that was awesome. I loved it. But when the COVID happened and we were all remote, we had to figure out a way to keep the show going. And that's actually where we saw more momentum spike, was after COVID and when we were remote and having to figure out how to get in touch with people. And what we really saw was that when we got outside of that routine and our narrow focus of what we thought the show could be as an in-person interview show, we were able to go so much further and talk to so many more people than what we could. I think of, we have talked to Maya, who's over in Israel. We've talking to Simon just a couple episodes ago down in Australia. And we've talked with tons of Canadians as well. Like, we wouldn't get to talk with all those people. And if we were stuck in our routine of the face-to-face in-person format, not even just international guests, but just all across the country, we're able to reach out and talk with people and have those conversations that I think stepping outside of our routine has allowed us to really open up our scope, which has been really cool.
Yeah. And we all have home field advantage. Everybody gets to be in that environment that they've set up. And I think everybody gets to be more open and I think you get to be more open and talk about the things that may be harder in kind of a stiffer in-person setting.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, if you could go back in time and tell us one thing when we started this adventure, what would it be?
Probably it would have to be, don't sweat the message. Learning to be a podcaster it isn't harnessing what other people are saying and crafting your own message. It's letting the voices kind of speak for themselves. And it's, if anything, it's more of you're pointing out something that, and or highlighting something that somebody's already saying. And it's not the podcaster's job to make the message be exactly coming from their agenda. It's the whole industry voice.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out, and it's something that I talked with Jeff Sample about, bringing him back on. That the first few episodes that we were doing, I'm admittedly a bit of more of a control freak than what I let on it. And those first few episodes, I think overly scripted everything and tried to like, this is what I wanted people to come away with, and the message that I wanted to get the guests to talk about. And I kind of cringed some listening back to some of those first early episodes, because it's so just more rigid. And
Yeah.
Jeff really encouraged me in those. He was one of our early guests of just relax and let the conversation come to you. And that was super helpful for me of, oh yeah, I don't have to script everything, and the guests, let the guests run and see where they're going, go down some of those rabbit trails. And sometimes they end up talking, like I have a concept for the episode in my mind going into it. And sometimes it falls perfectly into that concept without me really trying and forcing it into that. And then other times it goes in a totally different direction than what I thought. And those episodes are usually my favorite, because they are so much better than what I had thought coming into the episode. And that's what's most fun for me, is when we can go down those rabbit trails and kind of just take that left turn and explore a new area and really learn from somebody that is passionate about a particular topic. One of the things that I like to do, this is some behind the scenes information, but once we finish the conversation, I'll always ask a guest, all right, is there anything that we left out that you want to make sure gets in the episode? And usually those conversations, if something pops up during that, those are some of the best moments of the episode that we splice back into the conversation, because that's when they just A, are more relaxed, but B, they're going to be talking about something that they are super passionate about. And that fire that they're talking with really comes shining through, which is really cool. And a lot of times I could be a whole other conversation that they bring up that we kind of dive into.
Yeah. I would love to share a funny story about, not from this podcast, but from a moment in my life when something was over scripted. So back in college, I took a class on TED Talks, and it was how to kind of getting everybody up to speed on what the modern standard for public speaking was. And each person in the class ended up getting assigned to one of the presenters that was going to go on stage. And what you might not know about TED Talks is it's really a lot of prep, a lot of trying to craft this message into a very concise script. There's the famous quote of, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. Yeah. And there's a lot that goes into scripting those things. And so somebody that I was assigned was a surfer. He had a big kind of VW van. He chilled out. He rode around everywhere. And he had a great story about, he was a journalist too. So he had a great story about kind of looking at all these surfers and chasing down a big the biggest wave and people disappearing and everything like that. And everything was excellent. And we got to the dress rehearsal, which is the first test of your metal. It's when you step up on stage and you get the mic put on you.
Yeah.
And suddenly he is this kind of free-flowing guy, but he's trying to read from a script. And he freaked out a little bit. In fact, I had to tell my classmates that he basically left the stage, drove to his mom's house, and was like, I'll have to duck out for tomorrow and you'll never know I was here. And so I had to go over to my professor and say, I'm going to Chris's mom's house and we're going to have a drink or two and relax and stop worrying about whatever is happening here. And we basically just said, forget the script, tell the story that you literally wrote a book on. And he came back the next day and just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. I think that there's so much beauty and wisdom in just making that human connection and having a conversation with somebody and not taking it too seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, producing the podcast, hey, maybe describe to some people what producing and editing podcasts actually means, but what has surprised you most in producing this podcast?
Yeah, I would say the editing looks similar for everybody and producing looks probably different for everybody. Producing is really just you're doing what it takes to make the show happen. So it really is pitching in where needed. And editing is kind of using it's really in some ways developing a workflow, just like you would for any other process in the industry, like we talk about all the time. And I guess the thing that really has surprised me throughout the whole thing is just how all of these stories and narratives weave themselves together. It really gives you a sense of what it means to listen. You get to do some different, really kind of active listening when you're editing, because you're everybody, you're getting everybody to sound the best they possibly could. And what you might not expect is that we really keep probably 97+% of everything that's said. So there's no real huge crazy thing going on behind the scenes. And it's really the thing that surprised me is that there's not a ton that really takes that it doesn't take a ton to make these people sound amazing.
Yeah, they're brilliant that are coming on and passionate about what they're doing, which is I think really contagious. That's one of the cool things for me over the 100 episodes is seeing all these people's energy and passion for construction and innovation or culture, whatever we've gone into, has really sparked a really big passion for me in those same areas, because you can't help but get excited about what they're talking about. And there's a lot of research and prep that goes into each episode too, because when a guest comes on, I want to know a lot about them and what they're doing and their area that they're talking about. So I read a ton and listen to a ton of other podcasts that they've been on or in the same space or whatever. And so it's really cool that the more you put yourself out there and dive into those topics, there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in construction. So that kind of leads me to another question for you from producing the show and listening to all the conversations. And for our listeners, Eric is in the recording with every single one of our guests, and then he has to listen over and over and over again during the editing process. So sorry for having to hear my voice over and over again in your ears throughout the day. But what gets you most excited about the construction industry and the potential that you see from listening to our guests?
A lot. I think it's just the industry is just bursting with potential. I'm brought to, I think this was Kevin Suhu's episode recently, where he was talking about how it's a little bit unfair to compare construction to something like the fintech industry, because you're looking at it as, you know, with fintech, it's numbers on a screen, but with construction, it's people, processes, and giant projects. And it's, you know, saying it's comparing apples to oranges isn't even close to a good analogy. But what I'm excited to see is what we were saying earlier, looking into like drawing ideas from different industries. Kevin was also saying that, you know, some of the smaller companies can really take some ideas from what's working for the bigger companies. And while construction isn't necessarily the small company here, I think it's just so cool to see like the raw potential of the industry. There's so many new ideas to be had, and there's so much already at work that I think I think in just a very short amount of time, I think it's really going to be a completely different industry for the better. Yeah,
I agree. I've said it a lot over the last several episodes, especially that the construction industry over the next decade is going to be drastically different than the construction industry of the last 50 years because of all the technology coming in, whether it's the advancements in AI or AR and VR. I think that there's a lot of really cool potential opportunities to not only just get more efficient, but especially coming out of COVID and remote work, that we can get the best of both worlds. Was a lot of really good things that happened being remote and having to embrace technology and not always having to travel to have a meeting or having to be on site, that we figured out how to be able to go do a site visit while being home for dinner and going to your kid's baseball game or whatever that night, and not having to kind of make that sacrifice of family versus work. And so coming out of it, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to be just more intentional and strategic with when we do stuff and how we do stuff, and capitalize on what was really good with the in-person stuff and what's been really good with the virtual stuff, and not have to compromise on areas as much. So yeah, I think it's exciting what's coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Has the working on this podcast changed your perception of the industry as a whole? You know, one of the common themes that we talk about a lot is the marketing problem in and with the construction industry. So just curious if listening to all these conversations has made you shift your opinion at all of construction.
Yeah, I could definitely say it's changed it in a couple of ways. One of the ways I think that the industry was totally different than I was expecting was in just how much everyone has to contribute. And I don't just mean in productivity and work, I mean ideas. We've talked a ton about, you know, people sharing their ideas, not only in their own company, but also between the industry. And I think that, you know, a lot of what people have harped on with industry is listening to the people that are on the ground floor actually implementing the tools, tricks, and workflows and stuff. But I think that there's so much more potential than has even been discovered that is really different than I thought. I thought it would just kind of be, a couple of people saying we're gonna do it this way, and then everybody does it that way. But everybody has a say in kind of shaping how the companies are run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think one of the fascinating things for me, so when we started Bridging the Gap, it wasn't, the idea behind it wasn't to solely focus just on construction and MEP. It was to be more holistic with AEC. What we found, though, that the construction industry and the trades, even more specifically, they were the ones that were most open to talk and to share ideas and to brainstorm and to have these deeper conversations about soft skills and culture and what it takes to have a growth mindset and the innovation that is happening in the industry, and how do we push the industry forward. And for me, that was actually quite surprising at first, that it was the construction segment that was most open to those conversations. I going into this, I thought we would have a harder time getting construction people on than A and E, the architects and engineers, but it was really the very stark polar opposite of that. And so that's why we started really leaning into construction. And I think the amazing thing is that there really are so many people throughout the industry in all walks of life, all up and down the construction hierarchy, that are trying to push this innovation message. And it's one of the things that I find most rewarding about the podcast. And one of my favorite things is when people reach out to me and talk about, what really resonated with people and the impact that different conversations have had. And I've gotten several messages of people saying that, they might have been on the AE side of AEC, and listening to the show, they have actually switched focuses and careers and gone into construction to see the tech and the innovation happening there. And it kind of blows my mind every time I get one of those messages, but it's really cool, really humbling that these conversations are having an impact. And I feel the seriousness and the weight of that, to let's make sure that these conversations are as meaningful and impactful and really what the industry is going and what people are wanting to hear about. So there's a lot of time and attention taken into what topics we put on. And it's just really cool to see that momentum being built and that impact that you can see and feel.
Yeah, it's been so cool to see all of those voices come together in different ways. And one of the other things that has changed in my perception of the industry is just how much of how connected people actually are. I mean, that people are really just one introduction away from kind of being a part of the larger conversation. And so many people, it's just not nearly as siloed as I thought it might be. There really are a lot of people that span across a bunch of different disciplines. And I think it's been really cool to see some kind of, I guess you could say, convergence in a way, in that a lot of different disciplines are kind of moving back and forth between one another.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my other favorite things, this is totally from personal gain, I guess, but one of my favorite things about the podcast is meeting people and the conversations that have happened on camera, in front of the mic, and then in the lead up. I always, for the most part, talk to every single guest, have a conversation with them before we actually start the recording, and just to kind of get to know them, see where their passions and their interests are. And the friendships that have formed with our guest over the course of the show is really something cool. That coming into this, I didn't know most of the people that have come on the show, but now I count a lot of them as friends, and we talk on a very regular basis, which is really cool that this format and this venue, you're able to have such rich and meaningful conversations that you make that connection and that bond in a way that I don't think you really do outside of this format, which is from a personal vantage point, that's one of my favorite aspects of it. Is I get to make a whole lot more new friends every time we do an episode.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And they've really helped encourage and help find our voice over the course of the 100 episodes too. And, I'll get messages from past guests of like, oh, I listened to this show this week. This was really cool. You should talk to this person, or, you should dive into this area. And that's always super helpful of like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or I don't know that person, or yeah, introduce me. Happy to have a conversation with them and make more friends. So from a personal vantage point, that's been really cool. On another kind of standout, what's been on the humbling side, I pulled the stats yesterday of the show, looking back on, what's been our reach. And I was quite shocked at seeing how many countries that the show has been in. We've been in 65 countries now. We have listeners in 65 different countries around the world.
Wow.
Which is truly mind-blowing. But what's cool about that is these conversations and these topics that we're talking about, the innovation and the technology and the culture, they're really universal truths around the world. To resonate in 65 different countries I think that proves that there's a hunger in the construction industry for this new mindset, for disruption, for growth mindset. And that's really cool. And in the States, we're in every state but Alaska. So if you know anybody that's in Alaska, have there been other kind of standout moments for you?
Yeah, I think
maybe more on the personal side of standout moments.
Yeah, there have been several just amazingly unexpected moments. I got a message on LinkedIn from somebody that I sort of knew from way back from high school. And he just said he was shocked to find out that I was associated with the show, because he had been listening to the show and really enjoyed it for a really long time. And it's so cool to see those kind of stories come through. And
that's awesome.
Every once in a while you just hit these moments of like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Like that show has been a mainstay in what I listen to all the time. And it's just, I really had barely known the person from high school, but he reached out, and it was just so encouraging to see that. And there's stories like that all the time.
Yeah, that's really cool. Really cool. So another big standout highlight in the 100 episodes that we haven't talked about is winning the best construction podcast, which was really quite shocking. When we got nominated for it, I was like, oh, this is super exciting. This is a pleasure to be nominated. We're up against like incredible podcasts that a lot of them had come on and been guests, and was learned from them. And like, I think of like the Contact Crew. And so to be in the running with them, it was really cool. And those like weekly tracking, that I think the first week out, we came out of the gate and we're leading the pack. And that was mind blowing to me, that we were out front, and that people were voting, and it really resonated with the show that way. And so again, that was one of those, oh, this is serious. This is not just, I think it's so much fun to do the podcast and to have the conversations, but it was like, oh, this is meaningful and impactful for people. This is not just a fun thing I get to do. This is serious stuff. And that was just totally mind-blowing and humbling in a way that is really hard to describe and to put into words when we were able to win that and get voted for it. I think that's the coolest part, is the people actually went out and took the time to vote. So thank you guys so much again for taking that time and voting for the podcast and listening, most of all.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for listening, whether it's your first time or you've been here since Burning Man and before. But that's when a lot of those when the competition was going on, that's when a lot of those serendipitous conversations came to light. That's when the person reached out to me on LinkedIn. He was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool that you guys are kind of on the map there. I've loved this show." And it's really cool because that it's just another example of like sharing personal passions kind of comes out in other areas of life.
Yeah, definitely. So in thinking through the 100 episodes, we had looked through the different themes that had popped up over the course of all those episodes and conversations. And it kind of boiled down to about 4 kind of main buckets that we noticed. We had the leadership, culture, soft skills bucket that a conversation kind of took form in. We had the innovation growth mindset that people really talked about. The third, digital transformation and kind of the tech stack episodes. And then the fourth was the marketing problem that is in construction and how do we change that perception. And that sounds like the episodes break down into nice, clean lines and buckets. But the reality is that in pretty much every single one of the conversations, whether meaning to or not, we bleed over into all 4 of those buckets in some way, which is pretty cool that there's such a strong connection between all 4 of those areas in every facet of construction. But wanted to kind of take each of those buckets and kind of talk through some lessons or some standouts moments in those different nice, neat buckets. And we talked some of it already, but tackling the leadership, culture, and soft skill side of the conversations, what kind of stands out and jumps out to you?
Yeah. So the leadership, the themes in leadership really has personally been the biggest area that I feel like I've gotten the most out of just listening and working on the podcast. There's too many to encapsulate, but there are definitely some that are worth pointing out. So I know you're going to call him out, but one of my favorite guests was Bob Caslin. And he said it perfectly when he just said the most effective leadership trait is trust. And it's a function of competence and character. And I think that sets the tone for a lot of the other conversations that we've had on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, from a personal vantage point, I was fangirling out during that episode. He was at the time the president of the University of South Carolina, my alma mater, and just such a cool, smart guy. I was hanging on his every word, every single story that he was telling, and the impact of leadership. He has the awesome book too, the Character Edge, and just loved reading that as well too. That's, for me, that's has to be in one of my top 3 personal favorite episodes of all the 100 so far, from the aspect of just such great advice in leadership. And for those who don't know or don't remember, he was a lieutenant general as well too in the Army, and had like a 40+ year career and served as the superintendent at West Point. How some of the kind of just basic leadership tenets, especially around trust, made such a big impact. Like one of the stories that he was telling in that episode was about when he was over in Iraq, and one of the generals there really kind of went into one of the villages, and just by simple, easy things of building relationships and turning how things had been done on its head, it just totally revolutionized the Iraq war. But it's an untold story. Nobody knows about it, but it had such a big catalyst of taking this village and turning them from enemies into one of our staunchest allies in the region. And I just think his stories were incredible. So I highly encourage people to go back and listen to Bob Castlin's episode.
Definitely. And totally agree. I loved his book too. It had a lot of similar themes from the episode.
Yeah.
And yeah, in another part of the leadership aspect, I guess if you were to zoom in more on a kind of a practical advice, or if you're looking at just like, one-to-one interactions between, managers and employees, I think Mike Zivanovic was key on that. And I would almost say one of the taglines that for the show almost has developed from his episode, and that's getting to know the person behind the employee.
Yeah.
I think that builds on what Bob was saying about trust. You got to actually know a person to be able to trust them in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm extremely passionate about that, of knowing the person behind the employee. I think you have to, in order to not only lead a team, but just to be on a team. I think you have to humanize everybody that you work with. Mike's episode, I think, was probably one of those other turning point episodes, for me at least, on the podcast. Of, we tackled some pretty heavy themes in that, with mental health and suicide and depression that is way too prevalent in construction. And that episode it resonated so much. It's probably one of in the top 5 episodes of responses that I got back after we posted that episode. And it was just really cool to have that conversation and to see the relevance of, when we can talk about heavy issues and intense issues, serious issues, but you can do it in a way that people want to listen to, and that Mike, just his jovial nature helped in making it just it sounds like a weird phrase to say when you're talking about a mental health episode, but an enjoyable listen. It was just fun talking to him, even though we went into some really serious coverage and ground. Same with Darcy Grodadaro's episode though too, on mental health and pairing that with burnout, and just the stats and statistics behind it, and what you can do to fight against that.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going off of the, individual employee level, I am brought to think about what Jake Olson said in terms of, recruiting and finding talent. He said that the great employees aren't looking for a job because they're already at a great company.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that is super relevant to today, especially if we're looking at Brandon Patterson's episode too. He said that, in the past 18 months and the availability of online tools and stuff like that, people have a very good idea of like how people are working or how companies are treating their employees, and they have a very good idea about how they want to grow in their career.
Yeah. Definitely. Jake's episode is a perfect example of having excuse me. Jake's episode is a perfect example of having an idea of a conversation in mind and then just leaning into that dramatic left turn over the course of the conversation. And I mean, we were geeking out hard for a big portion of it on personality profiles and all that stuff, which I find incredibly fascinating. And I could talk about that for hours and hours, and I have been known to do that. But that was a fun episode and just kind of leaning in. Jake was super passionate about personality profiles as well, and how he leverages for his team to really great effect. And that was a fun, unexpected left turn that was great to lean into. Another episode to kind of call out in this section, and then we can move on to the second bucket, is Dan Walsh's episode and the whole concept of leveling up. That's how we kicked off our 2021 episodes, was with that. It was I think a perfect episode to really kick off a new year and think through, how do you find those 1% improvements and level up your game with everything that you do, because there's always something that you can do to get better at, no matter what it is. You can be at the top of your game. You could be winning all the gold medals in the Olympics, but there's always something that you can do to improve and get better.
Yeah, I loved that. I took the level up theme for a lot of the beginning of this year, and it set a great tone for 2021 for sure.
Yeah. All right, so bucket number 2, which is kind of one of the main pillars. It's become the tagline of the show: innovation and the growth mindset. Any standout moments in this?
Yeah, I would say in Mark Oden's episode, the second one, the second time he was on the show, something that sets the tone for innovation and disruption in a way is, he said, we're putting a lot more thought behind what we build before we even pour concrete.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think that's, you can almost use that as an analogy for anything else that's being implemented in the industry. But I think a lot of people would agree that, you know, we're all starting to challenge the notion of this is how we've always done things. And I think that quote ties in perfectly into, like, we're putting a lot more thought behind what we're doing than we did before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many. So caveat with all these shout outs, I'm so sorry for not shouting out every single person, because I could go and geek out on every single person's episode. A couple of the people that kind of immediately spring to mind when we go into innovation and growth mindset, Marcelo has to be one of them for sure. And unpacking, again, that was kind of a left turn conversation as well too, because we came in thinking that it was going to be all computational design, and it was, but pleasantly surprised in most of the conversation was around growth mindset and how do you have it, and how do you make the industry have it, and what are some of the hurdles that the industry has in not having it. And Marcelo is brilliant, and so his take on anything is going to be really well thought out and thought provoking. So that's one. Peyton Kringley's episode as well too, at the beginning of the year, is another one that immediately kind of springs to mind. And all the research that he did on technology adoption and how different people approach technology, and none of it is wrong, but it's so important to know what somebody's view of technology is, because you can't get them to innovate anything unless you already know where their baseline is. And then it's about tying it back into Dan's 1% leveling up. How do you get that person to move to the next step? It's not about getting them to the finish line every time. It's about what's the next right step for that specific person. And then maybe a final shout out in this was Corey Borchart's, where just his approach to being an executive at an electrical trade company was really refreshing on empowering people to make the decision and to bring things up and to figure out what are the areas that we need to make improvements on. And all the way down the chain, he empowers people along the way. And just his story of being able to not only pull that off culturally, but to see the big impact that it has on the bottom line as well too, when you let go of that control and that you are not the only person that innovation is placed on, because you're just one person. You have to crowdsource the whole concept of innovation. It has to bleed into the culture of the company for it to actually have the impact that it's supposed to have.
Yeah, I agree. And I think whenever we've had Clay Smith on the podcast, I think he's had some great thoughts on and really practical applications on innovation, just in terms of the simple fact of getting industry feedback, like working iteratively in a way that's you're building something as you're also like working on it with, as somebody's giving you feedback in real time. And I think the overall, like an innovation breakthrough, there might not be as many huge aha moments that way, but I think I think that is an underrated part of innovation, is working at the same time that you're getting feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So bucket number 3, digital transformation and the tech stacks that are being used right now. What jumps out to you in that section?
Yeah, I'd go back to Dan Walsh's episode on digital transformation for sure. So something when I was listening to his episode, when I was thinking about our recording today, and he paints a very interesting picture on digital transformation, because I don't know, there's almost kind of a poetry to it, if you will, in that we're seeing a ridiculous amount of digital transformation in the area of moving, your data from, on premises to the cloud. And at the exact same time, that's happening with the people too. I think that the technology is mirroring the people in some way. This past year of digital transformation is also a lot of people starting to work remote. And I think he painted a great picture in his episode on how those two things kind of mirror and reflect each other. So in some ways, I think digital transformation is kind of the technology side of all the innovation that's happening on the personal level.
Yeah, that's a really cool call out. For me, one of the couple that kind of spring to mind, it was Jim Tavernelli's episode on again infusing innovation into the culture and how that transforms on the tech stack side of things. So they're a mechanical trade that now views themselves as a technology company. And the leadership retreat that he described in that episode, of that they went out and they basically asked the question of, what's the cost of not doing this, and what's the impact of, if we think that this is where the industry is going, what is that cost of not being ahead and being a leader in that? And the question really dramatically changed how they ran the business and the direction that they're going, and then having to be the ambassador and evangelist to the rest of the company for an extended period of time, and even still now, a couple of years after the fact, still preaching that message of this is why we're doing it, and this is the importance of the digital transformation, and why technology has to be infused into the culture and every single process that we do. So that I think that was a great conversation there. Another person that jumps out to me is Nathan Wood. Anytime you talk digital transformation, there's Nathan has to come to the top of the list on spokesman for that. and to use his phrase, the shared pains that are in the industry, and how do you get people to overcome those shared pains by talking about it and leveraging technology, and that it's not that scary. You can have that interoperability of technology. You have to be intentional about it. It takes work. I mean, we bled into that interoperability with a couple other people, with Tom Stem and Stuart Carroll and Dan McCarthy, on the impact of data and all that as well too. But yeah, all those I think really summarize the digital transformation that is happening in the industry, and why it's not that scary. People have been able to adapt quite well to it, and the potential that it has moving forward as well. And then the final kind of, not the final, but one of the other super big call outs, we've already given a shout out to it, but was Amy Marks' episode, and talking all about industrialized construction. That's probably another turning point episode too, a catalyst episode on really, we talked about the industrialized construction concept sort of in previous episodes, but really diving in deep to that. And obviously she's the queen of prefab. There's no better person to talk industrialized construction with than Amy Marks. And just hearing her advice on how to really transform the construction industry to be ahead of the curve and help push the skilled trades up to the front, and laying out that roadmap of how we get there, and making it super practical, and laying out that case, I think was a pretty cool and impactful episode.
Yeah, I think Amy Marks is perfect to also bring into the fourth kind of theme we were talking about with the marketing problem in construction. I mean, come on, queen of prefab, genius marketing slogan. She kind of has her own like reality show about industrialized construction with Autodesk. And I think no one has ever had a doubt in their mind that Amy Marks has doubted that the rise of industrialized construction is here. And I think she is one of the best examples out there of getting the word out about what she's passionate about and where the industry is going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. That fourth bucket of the marketing perception problem of construction, I think that was an area that, as we were having these conversations, popped up pretty heavily in my mind. And admittedly, it's because I'm very biased, and I think through the marketing prism. But it was, I'm having all these conversations about innovation and technology, and then I would talk to people outside of construction and say that I hosted this podcast about technology, innovation, and construction, and people would give me this weird look of like, what technology do they use? And it was such a stark contrast of, oh, you don't even know all the just mind-blowing things that the industry is leveraging and adopting, and the potential that is here. And so that's why I started really diving in and asking people about it, of like, all right, well, why is there such this stark divide, and why have the construction industry really let other people outside of the industry dictate what the perception is? And what the reality is when it's not really the case at all. You see the sitcom of the dumb construction worker with his, he just has his tool belt on that's fallen off of his hips, and it's not the reality of what a job site is anymore. And there's so many people that we could call out. Brandon, you already called out that it was just so recent, talking exclusively all about this for the whole episode. Dylan Mitchell also got into it too, on the potential of technology, but how do we pull in the younger people? Shantae Hall, I mean, that's her career at Victory Trades Alliance. And how do we pull in the military vets and bring them in? But she's having to convince people from the military that the skilled trades is a perfect industry for them. And she had the great example of, everybody is a marketer now for your company. Post something on LinkedIn. Doesn't have to be post something on Instagram. It doesn't have to be anything super complicated, but you are a walking billboard, I think was her direct quote, for your company. So be proud of that and go out and represent not only your company, but your industry, and take pride that you are in the construction industry. This is the industry that just wills buildings out of the ground. It's freaking cool. So be prideful and take advantage of that, and go out and tell people what you're actually doing. Cliff Cole, another great example of going out and mentoring young people and giving them an up close look at what's going on in the industry. And then a final shout out in this category is Travis Foss, when he was on the MEP Force recap panel last year. He ended it by saying, go out and share your story, go out and tell other people about it, because if you're not telling people, you're not pulling other people into it, nobody's going to know. Don't let construction be this great unkept secret, because we have to pull people in. We have this labor shortage that everybody knows about, and we have to bring people in, and we have to change minds about the industry in order to bring the people that we need in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love what you said about willing the like a giant building to happen. I really think another way you can look at the marketing problem in construction is just how to develop a force of will, how to develop the willpower to get something to kind of become real.
Yeah. It makes me think of James Simpson talking all about grit in construction, and the grit and that can-do attitude that happens in construction.
Yeah.
So on a lighthearted note, what are some of the fun kind of behind the scenes moments that stand out to you? People don't get to see or hear.
There are a few. I think I've joked before, Todd, that you're on camera a lot, and it's impossible to avoid becoming the subject of a blooper or two. And behind the scenes,
or a lot more than two.
Behind the scenes, just so our listeners know that there's a file of bloopers out there. They're not forgotten. The podcasting mediums in some ways demands a very polished and finished audio and video experience, but there's a lot of funny stuff that goes on behind the scenes of like, hey, can you cut that out?
It's mostly me drinking water and being right next to the mic and having a very loud swallow, apparently.
I have taken a couple sips during this episode, and I have leaned very far back.
I've gotten very good and very self-conscious of being on mute during this. Very good at the mute trigger now.
We haven't been the Bridging the Gulp podcast in a while now.
That's right. But now I can mute myself. I don't have the lavalier mic like what we did when we were in person.
Hard to avoid that.
It's usually the Todd takes that it takes me so many times to say those words for whatever reason. When I get to that section, it's like words don't function properly out of my mouth. So that it's, or I think I say the word wrong, but it actually, I didn't. And so I'm like, man. And then I ruined the take and I have to do it again. And
it's funny when editing that part, you can look at the little jumps and spikes in your audio to figure out, as like, okay, this looks like it's 3 takes. And in Zoom, you can search the transcription. So sometimes I'll just search take 2 or take 3 and start right from there. So no, that's just one of the funny parts that happens.
Nice. Looking towards the next 100 episodes, if you could kind of write the script, what direction would the show take? Where would we be at episode 200 where we're not at episode 100?
Interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of these themes are going to continue building on one another. I think some of the bigger ideas are going to be expanded, and I think we're also, our collective voice, I think we're going to uncover some more things that are even more unexpected. And I think we're going to get to watch the industry change over the next however long another 100 episodes takes. And I think it's going to continue just weaving this tapestry of hammering in those important themes, especially heavy on how important good leadership is. And I think this network of people is going to continue to grow and expand. And I think we're all going to become more optimistic and more willing to share as a part of this.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I see us being able to, I like to keep things as practical as we can in these conversations, but I think that there's even a next layer down that we can get into. I kind of viewed this first 100 as setting an incredible table with a lot of detail on it, but now let's start putting the banquet and the feast on top of the table, and really just building out that picture even more and diving down into these areas, just that next layer down, and getting even more unique voices. I would love to talk with more people from the field about innovation as well too. We've been heavier on the office side of the house, and I think talking with people that are actually in the field doing the work and how they're viewing things would be incredibly fascinating. So if you know of people, send them my way. I would love to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out and a great point to focus in on.
Eric, all the conversations that you've heard, if you could innovate one thing in the industry, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it'd be something in some ways kind of simple. I think it would be putting in just a couple of extra metrics to help the people that are doing the innovating. So I feel like a lot of the conversations we hear is just, we end up on, is it profitable or is it saving cost? And what I would suggest building in, when you're adopting new tools or processes, I would suggest building in some kind of those quick win metrics of like, what is actually showing that this is working, or what is going to show that this will affect profits. A lot of people in the industry are willing to share, but also at the same time, I would say a lot of people are still, in competition, kind of trying to win their respective race. And I think we actually can use that competition for some of these metrics. I think a lot of people understand, well, we're beating the industry standard, or we're beating our biggest competition in how fast we're adopting this or how fast we're saving costs. So I think there are some ways to kind of get the leadership and the pressure off your back in some really quick wins when you're trying to implement and innovate.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm always up for a good competition and trying to beat a goal. So yeah, I think that's great. So Eric, final question for you. You have the advantage of all other people that have come on and had to answer this question, because you've heard it so many different answers. What does innovation mean to you?
Yes, I was ready, and I did know this question was coming. I think innovation is a product of a lot of different mindsets. So I think having a growth mindset, you're always out there looking for ways that you can grow and be better. And I also think it is a mindset of curiosity. I think wondering, looking outside of the industry and wondering how something could be applied to what you're doing, or, just thinking out of the box is, you're always kind of in the space of like, I wonder how we could make that work. And so I think the last part of that would also be optimism, because you have to be always looking forward to thinking like things are always going to improve. It's just a matter of figuring out the way to make that happen. And so I think you get innovation when you kind of cultivate all of those mindsets. So I really think that it is, making things work and then making them work better.
Yeah. You're the first person to call out optimism in the innovation response, which is so good. I love that, because in order to be an innovator, you have to kind of will things into existence. And in order to do that, you have to have the confidence to, it's going to work. And that requires an optimistic spirit and attitude. I think that's great. I love that.
Thanks. Yeah. I would argue that's probably one of the biggest parts.
That's huge.
A lot of people might not even think they're an optimistic person, but really, I think a lot of people are full of optimism in that way.